Hello and welcome back to my channel, Checks, Captures, Threats. Today's episode, in episode 57 of the Chess Guide, we'll be going over playing for a draw. So, this is a bit of a unconventional episode today, because obviously, as we know, we'd always like to win a game. Now, this is for stuff like if you're playing in a tournament online over the board, or if this is playing, a certain player or anything like this. If you want to play for a draw, whether you're losing, or you're going to win a tournament if you just need to get a draw, this is probably the video to watch. Now, why I'm going over this is because there is moments that when I used to be on the chess over the board tournaments, I had chances to win if all I had to do was draw. Now, at the time, I wouldn't know because I was not as good as I probably am today, as obviously over time I've been able to grasp a lot more, of the advanced stuff, and how now I know some ways I can play for certain draws, because then I was just moving pieces, still wanting to try and win, And a very silly moment, I'll say this now, is when I was younger, all I had to do was get a draw. I didn't know this at the time, and the guy I played against even offered me a draw, and I declined it, and later on lost the game and lost the tournament. So, hopefully, by the end of watching this, and maybe if you're playing a tournament or you're just wanting to, maybe you need that one extra point to get up to like 1700, for example, on chess.com, all you need is a draw. You can do that by all means. So, what I've got here is 3 examples of ways we can use this to play a draw. So the first one will be threefold. The second one is playing over the board just to try and get a draw here by force play. And last but not least, how we can create a stalemate. So, this is the first one. Now, if we look at the position, it's a very mess around position. This isn't a certain opening this time. This is just some position I've created to try and get this to show you. So here, it's 1 point up actually for white here, because it's like 2 pawns for a knight here, I think. So, what we have here is, if white doesn't do anything, they're going to be losing either a knight or a bishop here, as we can see. So, by how are we going to get this position to a threefold? Now, here we can make 2 sacrifices. So now I've said that, you can pause the video here and try and find it. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, hopefully you could see that we actually sacrifice, either one. I don't think it matters at the minute too much, but I would say we sacrifice the knight here. After they capture, we're going to take with the bishop. After they take with the pawn, we now take with the queen. So, we get to this position. You're like, okay, we're now 2 points down. That's not even that bad when you think about how much we was a point up, and we sacrificed 6 points worth of material for 2 pawns, I think. Or 3 pawns, should I say. So, in the end, we've done all right there. Now, why is this threefold? Well, let's see if this king can move. It's only got 1 square. So, if we give another check, it's only got 1 square. So, as you see here, we can just keep playing this, and after 3 moves, it's going to be a draw because of threefold repetition. So, threefold repetition is obviously, as it kind of says, you play the same move 3 times in a row, and no one is progressing at all. So, hopefully you understand there. Now, this is one of the best ways to get a draw, to try and force one, because the queen is probably the best piece to try it. Sometimes you have maybe a rook, forcing it along 2 lines, or something like that. Now, obviously, it's going to be difficult trying to create a draw. It's probably harder to create a draw than to try and win the game. But, it's always, by any means, if you watch, the World Chess Championship, they're always half the time playing for draws. If you watched Magnus versus Caruana in about 2018, I think this was, around that time, there was, I think, out of the 12 games you have in a championship, they drew all 12 times. Just because Magnus was like a better blitz player, so he was always playing for these draws. He would always try and, have a go at winning the game. But 9 times out of 10, he was just playing to, get a draw, simplify the pieces. That's another way to get a draw, as I'm going to talk about in a second. But as we see, Magnus then, got to a blitz, and he just won because he's better in that time control. So there was many reasons to play for a draw, but obviously at your level, most likely around this 1,000 to 1,500, hopefully, maybe even higher, there's not that many occasions that we'll need to do this. but it's still good just to know. Now, as we said here about simplifying, so simplifying pieces is a very good way. Now, as we saw with the, as I can relate now to the Bobby Fischer game against Boris Spassky, what we saw there was Bobby Fischer swapped off every like single piece almost. There was only like a bishop and a knight, and left on each side of the board. Now, the reason he did this, again, it's a World Chess Championship. They most likely, back then there was probably a load more games. I think it might have even been 14, or it could have been up to 20 for all I know. I can't remember, but you have those games where they're going to try and play for a draw, especially Bobby Fischer, because at the time, it was a very difficult time for him against all these players from Soviet Union, because it was all chess players at the top 10 were Soviet Union other than Bobby Fischer. So again, simplifying, well, if you imagine it now, everyone's got the same amount of pieces, and we swap everything off the board, that's going to leave it a king and a king. So if you can try and do that, now obviously when you're down, that's where this free fall comes into play, and we're going to go over 2 more examples now. So this second one is quite simple. It's just a draw here, but it's still good just to show if we've simplified all our pieces down here, we get to these. Now we can even play moves, a very forced draw here. If you can actually see, we can even play the move e5 now, because it has to either take or, well, yeah, I think it's forced to take here, because if it pushes, it could actually get promoted almost. We can bring the king in. So obviously that won't happen. Now, if we take as black, we see here, this is just going to be a draw. As we see here, if we remember our king and pawn, this king needs to be ahead of this pawn, and we're going to remember something, if you'll see in a second, that if the pawn is above the king in the 6th rank, it's most likely a draw, and as we see here, that is going to be so, like so, and that was all forced there, and that's going to obviously be stalemate, again, like this, but that's not the exact stalemate we're going to show you. We're going to show you this right now. So, this is a very weird position, as you see. Realistically, black should win. It is white's go, but, you'd think, okay, so how's this going to work? Now, king f2. Now, after the king goes to h1, we can just play king f1 and do this, but an even better way is if we forcefully, king to g3 here. Now, this pawn is getting attacked. Obviously, we can't move the king to protect it, and obviously we can't go here because we just lose it. So what we have to do instead is obviously push the pawn, which then leads to a very weird stalemate here for black. It now cannot move. King can't move, and the pawns obviously can't move because it's blocked by the king. So now it's just a draw. So again, I would say creating a stalemate is very difficult to do, to try and get a draw. Again, it can happen, scenarios like this, but 9 times out of 10, you will not need to play for a draw. That is the main thing from this episode we're going to say. That is it for today, but I'm just going to quickly clarify some of the things. Most of the time, you always want to play for the win. That is quite obvious. But, there is some scenarios that you might need to get a draw to get a certain amount of points. Maybe you're playing one of the chess.com tournaments or the Lichess tournaments, and, getting a draw might, you get a 1 point or, multiple. I don't know how much you get in those, but, it's going to be worth it if you have to play a tournament or something like that, or get the points. And it's always sometimes a better way if you just do an unrated game, for example, and just try and play for it. It's a completely different game to try and do it, trying to swap off pieces, trying to, force them into, a drawn position instead of, risking moves where, you might be winning, you might be losing. There's no in between. So anyway, that is it for today's video. Hopefully you can get the aspect of what this does. So don't, take this to every game. Obviously, we want to win as many games as possible. As you see in the rapid increase, we're trying to win every single one as possible. Obviously, it doesn't go to plan. We've had a few draws. I haven't obviously been playing for a draw yet, but when I'm losing, I'd always want to try to. And, you can try that. So, hopefully you enjoyed today's video. So, thank you, and bye-bye.